My name is Julian, and this is my presentation on the E-170 secondary flight controls. Alright, now to start out, the CFI notebook defines secondary flight controls as secondary flight controls are used in conjunction with primary flight controls to refine aircraft manipulation further from the CFI notebook. So what this essentially means is secondary flight controls are used to give the pilot better control over the plane and to assist primary flight controls with their standard operation. And the secondary flight controls consist of flaps, slats, spoilers, and trim systems, as outlined in the outline here. You can see them on the plane, you can see them in their location. Alright, so we're going to get started with flaps. The E-170 has 6 different flap settings, which you can see here, from flaps 1 to flaps full. So the maximum flaps extended speed, or VFE, for flaps full is 165. You can see all the other VFE speeds here. Flaps are used primarily to increase lift and drag, and therefore are vital for takeoff and landings. So for takeoffs, flap setting 1 and 2 are most often used. This is because flaps are a lift device, and they produce both lift and drag. And so by using low flap settings, it means you can get the benefit of higher lift with the drag not affecting the aircraft as much. And so flaps 1 and 2 are most often used for takeoffs. Meanwhile, the most commonly used settings for landing is flap 5, while flap 6 is used for landings that require a steeper approach or on a shorter runway. And flaps are located on the trailing edge of the wing. This differs from the slats. So the slats are kind of work with the flaps. They're oftentimes controlled in tandem, and slats are located on the front edge of the wing, or the leading edge. And these also increase lift. And they're also used for takeoffs and landings, helping provide easier lift, and also allowing the plane to have more control at slower airspeeds. These are also retracted during cruise, the same as flaps would be, mostly because they produce drag, which is bad because it causes the aircraft to have worse performance and have a slower maximum airspeed, and just cause the aircraft to not operate as effectively in cruise. With that, we move on to spoilers. Spoilers' primary use is to disrupt airflow over the top of the wings of the aircraft, reducing lift. And so this is used to help an aircraft either slow down or descend. So ground spoilers used on the ground, are used to help the E-170 achieve maximum braking performance, which is beneficial for short field landings. So when you're on the ground, by reducing that lift, it helps the plane stop in a shorter distance. They're useful for all landings, but especially short field they come into play. They're located in the upper part of the 170's wings near the trailing edge of the aircraft, and they are controlled using the speed brake. All the spoilers deploy at once, allowing for the maximum effect. That we get to our final secondary system, trim systems. Now, trim systems exist to apply force to your primary controls. I'm sure if you've ever been flying a smaller aircraft like a Cessna, it kind of works in a similar way. You trim it out, and it just takes that pressure off the controls for you. You set them for a consistent pitch and altitude, and airspeed. Not altitude, it's just a consistent pitch and airspeed, and it reduces the force the pilot needs to exert to control the aircraft. The E-170 used the all-moving trim system for its elevator, which controls the tail's surface to impact pitch. With that, we've gone over all the secondary control systems in their standard usage cases, but now we're going to go into non-standard conditions. So full flaps are to be used on landings with short runways or steeper than usual approaches. We touched on it earlier, but just once again, it allows you to get more drag coming at a slower airspeed. On go-arounds, I saw this while reading over the manual for the plane. If you're going in for a flaps full landing, you're going to want to reduce the flap setting to flaps 4 on a go-around. With flaps 5, you reduce it to flaps 2. So basically, you're taking out these flaps, just letting you gain airspeed back, and be able to resume, and just be able to resume your approach path, and just kind of overfly the runway and get back into the pattern. For forced landings, you want to utilize the maximum amount of flaps you can safely use. This means you want to be touching down the lowest possible airspeed you can, and you can do that most effectively by utilizing the maximum amount of flaps that is safe. Spoilers, while not explicitly listed in what I read, can also be beneficial. They reduce your ground roll, and so obviously if you're landing in a field with not a lot of room or trees or a road with a steep bend at the end, having your spoilers deployed can definitely help you to reduce in forced landings, but it just should be used on a case by case basis. On a pitch or trim runaway, you want to use trim system 1. There's 2 buttons, trim systems 1 and 2. And if you can figure out which one is not working, you want to disengage that button. But in any case, if it comes to it, you can disengage both buttons to just disable the trim system. All right, so secondary flight control failures. For your flats and slats failure, this can be noticed by an indication on your EICAS, and it will appear as flap slat fail message. And now what you want to do if this is the case, it can mean 2 things. It means either both your flats and your slats didn't deploy to the next setting. Say you turn from flaps 2 to 3, maybe neither of them deployed, or maybe just one of them did, which can cause issues with the aircraft if the slats are on level 3 and the flaps are only on level 2. So what you want to do with this is you want to put it back to the last setting that it was working, where both were working in tandem at, and before putting it back to the new setting. And you can try this up to 2 times before it's recommended that you stop doing that. If you are having flap or slat failure in flight, you do not want to bank in excess of 20 degrees, and you want to use your flap override button to reset the flaps. And this is all listed on page 239 of the airplane flight manual. On page 237, we get to spoiler failure, where the most important step is to close the speed brake. You want to press the flight controls mode spoiler button that follows that. And if the spoilers fail in landing configuration, you want to set both your flaps and slats to full. And this is so you can just have the shortest landing distance, because with your spoilers not working, you're going to have a longer ground roll and just have the maximum amount of drag and a lower airspeed coming in. Even your flaps full landing, if you're landing without spoilers, can increase your landing distance by 1.45 times. Now we get to a case study I looked over, the 2021 Birmingham E-170 trim failure. On June 7th, 2021, there was an E-170 south of Birmingham that had a sudden trim failure. This caused the aircraft to suddenly have a lot of downwards pressure, which would have caused the plane to nosedive. However, the pilot was being very aware and cognizant, was able to catch it, putting both hands on the controls and being able to catch the plane before it nosedived. And however, the pilot was stuck at those controls because there was so much downwards force on the aircraft to keep the plane straight and level. He had to have both hands on the yoke, relying on his co-pilot to work the other systems. While this was going on, soon after, the autopilot system disengaged, and then later, it ended up the nose wheel steering system failed on landing roll. There was an investigation launched into it. All of this was unrelated. It was a lot of failures in one flight, though. So the failure I'm most concerned with here is obviously the trim failure, and this can be seen. It was the jamming of the horizontal stabilizer because some evaporated water got in there, condensed in the horizontal stabilizer, and then froze, which just led to it being frozen and ultimately the horizontal stabilizer jamming. Because the pilots acted quickly, remained calm, and went over the appropriate checklist both in the air and on the ground, no one was injured, passenger or crew, and there was no damage sustained to the plane or the airport that they landed at. All right, and this brings us to our conclusion. Secondary control systems are imperative to the E-170's function. These systems consist of the flaps, the slats, the spoilers, and the trim. These systems all serve to assist the primary control surfaces and allow for the pilot to have more control over the aircraft. These systems can and have failed before, but a skilled pilot, such as the one we saw a slide ago, can help to mitigate these failures and help everything turn out all right in these scenarios. And just one thing before I end off the presentation. As a pilot, we've gone over in our previous pilot classes a lot of situations where there have been disastrous outcomes for pilots overlooking and not paying attention or not knowing their aircraft systems well enough. The last case study I went over just now was the exact opposite. It could have ended disastrously. There was a lot of things that went wrong, and yet the pilots were both aware and both knew their systems, ran the checklists, remained calm, and were ready to act. And as the future of the aviation industry, it is our responsibility to be knowledgeable about our aircraft systems. And because the more knowledge is power, and the more knowledge we have in the air, the more easily we can safely pilot the plane, both in situations that are normal and abnormal, and help our passengers and our crew get to their destination safely. Here are my sources. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, all right?